the cool thing about the rose is that they really have a fruit that you can harvest way late in the season, like even into the winter, even when there's snow on the ground.
Some of the things you can do are rose water. You can make them into teas.
Here we have rose hips of different sizes and different stages.
Welcome back, everybody. We are back out here in the wilderness today.
That's right.
Yeah, getting a little bit late in the day, so we're happy we get to fit this video in for you. We are out today collecting rose hips, which is a super cool plant, vital food source year-round for all sorts of different animals and wildlife, including you and me.
Yep. Us curious foragers, you know, the deer love browsing on the rose plants themselves. There's a bunch of different rose species that we'll get into in a bit here. But the cool thing about the rose is that they really have a fruit that you can harvest way late in the season, like even into the winter, even when there's snow on the ground.
Yeah.
Right now it's the middle of October here. It's you know, the height of the archery hunting season, I would say, or the end of it. We're about to go into rifle season
Yeah,
here.
it's the downfall of the archery
It's
season.
kind of the very end of the archery season. And then we'll get into rifle season here. And you know, while you're out here hunting animals in Montana or in other states, because rose grows all over the place in the United States, you can, you know, if you're not finding animals, you can go out and use that time to collect some rose hips. And we'll just forage up this trail now. We know there are some pretty big, nice bushes around here, and hopefully they're still, you know, in their prime and have some nice fat rose hips on there for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's best to really wait actually until you have some frost to start collecting these rose hips, because they'll get way sweeter that way and just have a lot more flavor.
But if you need to go early season, just grab them early season.
Yeah, they might not be as flavorful at that point of the year. But you can, the cool thing is that you can actually grab rose hips that aren't, you know, haven't been exposed to a frost yet, put them in the freezer overnight, and that'll mimic that frost. And that should sweeten them up a bit too. So just something to note. All right, let's get going. I don't recommend eating them like that. Always make sure you open them first and that they're all clean and free of bugs, because as I was eating that, I looked into here and it's pretty moldy inside. Anyway, here we have a beautiful rose bush, the wild rose. So the rose are in the genus Rosa, and there are a ton of different species out there. In the US, I believe there's 50 different species, or in North America, I should say. Worldwide, there's about 100. In the US here we have native ones and invasive ones, and about 10 of them here in the Mountain West. I looked on the Montana field guides, that, you know, I think it's the Forest Service that publishes those online, and I could find 5 of them listed there. So I wrote them down because, you know, I've always just kind of looked at the rose, but never really, like, I've seen them, I've harvested some of them, but I've never really kind of dove into the different species and really trying to understand the different species. So that's kind of like, you know, 2.0 rose hip foraging for us right now, just kind of really learning the different species. But I wrote down the ones that supposedly, you know, we have around here. So there's prickly rose, that one's supposed to have the largest rose hips. There's the woods rose, Rosa woodsi is the scientific name, the prairie rose, the Nootka rose, and then the bald hip rose. The bald hip rose, I believe, is the smallest one in Montana, at least. There's also the multiflora rose, it's a weird kind of name, but that one is super invasive. It's a noxious weed, and that one you can find, I believe, all across the US. So, you know, when you find it, eat those rose hips, eat those rose petals, but make sure you absolutely demolish it afterwards, the actual plant, so that it doesn't outcompete some of the other native plants out here. But why should you even eat rose hips? You know, a lot of people, I think, walk past these and they don't know that they're edible and that they're a really great food source. In fact, the rose hips are the fruit of the wild rose, and they have a really nice floral, fruity flavor. And again, once they get that frost, that'll be more pronounced. But really tasty. You know, some of them might not have as much flavor as others. It's like with any wild food out there. Just gotta kind of sample some of them on the bush. And if you feel like that's the flavor you like, then you start harvesting a bunch. But going back to why you should eat these, the rose hips actually have a really cool nutritional profile. Specifically, they're really high in vitamin C and vitamin E. The vitamin C is more found in the actual rosehip flesh, whereas the vitamin E is more in the seeds. And I found a study, I'll try to blend it in here, that looked at a few different rose species, and they were saying that the rose has 20 to 30 times the amount of vitamin C as an orange, which is pretty crazy if you're comparing like the same weight of rose hips to orange. And I thought that was really cool. There's another study that I looked into that kind of, was looking at the harvest window or harvest time of rose hips. And they did find that the longer you wait in the year, the more the vitamin C goes down. So the less vitamin C they have, but the more carotenoids they have at that point. So if you want more vitamin C, you might want to start picking these earlier in the year. And, but carotenoids are still a really good phytonutrient to get. Carotenoids are really good for, they're anti-inflammatory and antioxidative. So them being, one of the most abundant natural sources of vitamin C in nature is pretty cool. And that's definitely a reason I suggest you start harvesting them or start going after them. But the other reason I think they're worth your while is that they're super lucrative in terms of like your energy expenditure while foraging, or like in a survival situation, because you can get a ton of rose hips in a really short time. Tom Alpel, who has some really great foraging books out there, he did some time studies, he mentioned in his book, and he said that he can get 3 quarts of these in an hour, which, I've never timed ours, we've never timed ourselves here, but I think that's probably pretty accurate. And obviously, if you can find some like these that are really big and meaty, those are going to be more worth your while than the really tiny ones, because they can come in all shapes and sizes. And we'll get into ID factors in just a sec here. First, I want to talk about where you can actually find roses. Like, where should you start looking for them in your local area? So the wild rose can be found in many different places. River bottoms are a great place to look, along hillsides in the mountains if you have a nice mountain trail, but they can also be in meadows and prairies, and the ones in the meadows and prairies I usually see are a lot shorter. And then also, if you're kind of looking for in the Mountain West for willow, poplar, and conifer forests along the edges of those, that's where I usually see them. So they can be in a lot of different spots, but the good thing is that they're really noticeable. Especially if you're looking for them now in September, October, or even November, they'll stick out like a sore thumb. In November, especially if there's snow on the ground already. I have read in some books that they say that they don't grow at high elevation, but out here in southwest Montana, I found them at 7,000 feet or more before. So, it doesn't hurt to look there. And it seems like, especially on this trail that we're on right now, there's some really fat ones. So we're pretty high. I would say we're at like 6,000 feet right now. So that's just something to keep in mind. You might read in a book that a location is not worth your time to look at, but they're wild plants and they do weird things sometimes. So, you know, don't only look at really low elevations for these. All right, let's talk some ID factors for the wild rose. They have alternate leaves, so the leaves aren't opposite from each other, if you can see that. They are staggered. So you got one here, then you got one a little further up. If they were opposite, they'd have a leaf coming out here and a leaf coming out here. Then it's also important to note that this whole thing is actually the leaf, not one of these tiny ones. This is actually a leaflet. So wild rose leaves, which this is a whole leaf here, are called pinnately compound in botanical terms. And that just means they have this center stem in here, got a leaflet on the tip, and then leaflets along it, like opposite along that stem. If you look closely, you'll also see that the leaflets are serrated. They have pretty good serration, and then they also have really noticeable veins. Then the backside is a bit paler. This rose here has some stuff on it, probably some insect eggs. I'm not sure what that is, but the back is a lot more paler. Now I have another rose leaf here just to show you, and you'll notice that at the bottom of the leaf petiole here, the leaf stem, there are stipules, they're called. So this is something you'll want to look for the rose. Then of course another thing to look for, just like the cultivated roses that you might have in your garden or that you might have bought at the flower shop, the wild rose will also have the thorns. They can vary in size from rose to rose. Some are more like the cultivated ones. These are really skinny and actually not as pokey. But then, like, this is a pretty new side shoot here, but you know, this main stem here, if you look, it doesn't really have many thorns on it. So sometimes you have to look closely for the thorns and sometimes you don't. I've noticed that a lot of the low brush, smaller roses here in the prairies and meadows, they have a ton of thorns. They're just covered in them. So that's definitely something you want to be looking for as well. So I wish I had an actual flower to show you guys. I'll try to blend in a picture, but the rose flowers, you know, in the summer they'll bloom and they will be usually pink to red. Some can be white, and I've also read that they can be yellow, but they'll have 5 nice petals, and underneath those petals they'll have 5 stipules, which are just like little green, I don't know how to really explain the stipules, but they're just kind of like sheaths of green leaf, I guess, that sit right under the flower in like a flower cup. And on that flower cup, the petals will be attached and those stipules. And then in the middle of the flower, you also have just a really nice yellow center with a bunch of you know, stamens in there and pistils, I think they're called. So it's just a really noticeable flower when you see one. And that flower cup will later turn into this rose hip when it kind of grows and swells around the fruit. And the rose hips is what we're really then after. So let's take a closer look at the rose hips and I'll talk about them a bit more, because I want you to be able to start harvesting these in mass so you can have a bunch of rose hips for fun kitchen projects. You might be thinking what I have in my pocket here. Well, it's actually a bunch of different rose hips I've been collecting on this hike. No, it is not the ring of power. I wish it were. Okay, let me show you some of the rose hips I got here. Here we have rose hips of different sizes and different stages. This up here are the calyx that you will see also in other rose family plants like apples and service berries. Those are all in the rose family too. Here you got one that's, I would say, a really good one to harvest. This one is a bit dry and past its prime, but it can still be used for tea or just for dehydrating. I mean, nature's already done the dehydrating for you here. And then these two tiny ones are ones that we gathered more in the prairie down below in the field on the way up here, where the rose bushes are a lot smaller. And I'm not sure, I think they're different species from these. But like I said, we're still learning about the different species and getting into the nitty-gritty there. All right, let's dissect one of these. I'll just take that calyx off. You can see there's already seeds in here. There is a lot of seeds in rose hips, and some people eat these, but a word of caution, some people can get digestive distress from these. I have, in the past as a kid in Germany, also used these seeds to play pranks on my friends. We used to grab rose hips, take these seeds and put the seeds down each other's shirt because they can cause an itchy sensation. So yeah, that's what we used to do as little rascals. But what you're really after is this flesh here, this outer flesh. And as you can tell, once the seeds are out, there's not a ton here, but this is what has all the flavor. And you can eat this raw or cooked, and we'll get into uses for in the kitchen later on in the video.
So once you get your rose hips home, you might be wondering, well, what do I do with these now? Some of the things you can do are rose water. You can make them into teas, some rose honey, fruit leathers, and some different body cosmetics. I know people use them to put like the scent into their lotions, which can be really fun.
Well, plus the nutrients, I'm sure, are good there too. I know there's definitely some medicinal uses that I haven't read into the medicinal uses enough. But I'm sure we'll be doing a podcast and a Year of Plenty podcast on these in the future, where we'll dive even deeper into rose hip and some of that. Lindy mentioned the tea. Tea is super good, and you can actually buy it at the store. Rose hip tea. What I really want to try that I recently found out about is a Swedish traditional method for using rose hips, and that's a rose hip soup. So it's a sweet soup.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Cool.
And they add sugar. We're just going to use maple syrup or honey or something like that. And they dip pastries or something in it.
Can we do that?
I don't know, unless you make the pastries and we make them semi-healthy.
Challenge
accepted. I don't eat a lot of sweet stuff. On a cheat day. I guess it would be a cheat day worthy food because we make it ourselves.
Delicious.
But there's so many uses for these rose hips in the kitchen. Another one that I'm really excited about is a ketchup. So found a recipe and using these to make a ketchup, like a natural ketchup. So yeah.
I wonder if it tastes like ketchup or like a rosy ketchup.
Yeah.
Be interesting.
I think in general the ketchup flavor that we're used to is,
not real.
Not like the traditional ketchup. I've read into that once. There's a whole backstory behind that. But anyway, really cool wild fruit to go after. Easy to miss, easy to just kind of ignore on your hikes if you don't know about them. But nutritional.
Easy to harvest.
Yeah. Nutritional powerhouse and easy to harvest. Mm-hmm. So definitely worth your time. And I hope you get out there and start collecting your own if you aren't already. And if you are already foraging for them, hopefully this video, taught you some new stuff about them. So we're gonna keep going here, try to fill our buckets as much as we can, and then take them home. And I'm sure we'll have a future video on, maybe making rosehip ketchup or something like that.
And if you have a favorite rosehip recipe that you've tried, it's tried and true, definitely put it down in the comments or send it to us, and we'll try to make that as well.
Yeah, I'd love that. Always down for inspiration from all of you. So thanks for watching. Bye-bye.